I had an argument with a friend once about whether media should be viewed as accountable for what its consumers do. I hate the stupid reactionary idea that video games are creating mass shooters, which was the starting point of this argument. It's a distraction from the propaganda of hatred that really creates them. But in this argument, I was arguing for media accountability, because that propaganda itself is media. And if we don't think J.K. Rowling or Dennis Prager or Matt Walsh spew ideas that create harm, then why are we even fighting against them? I think the most airtight argument I had for media's accountability, even if it doesn't fit into the incredibly blurry category of hate speech, is a fairly simple one. If positive representation matters, which my friend agreed it does, if media has the power to change us for good, how can it make sense that it doesn't have the power to change us the other way? The original idea for this video was one in which I compare what used to be my favorite show and the show that replaced it, while exploring what I see as their deepest philosophical difference. Bojack attempts to reflect the world, while Shira seeks to change it. The shows are about the same themes and are even structured similarly to a degree, so I thought it would be interesting to compare them in this way and try to find out which philosophy is better, more needed. My tentative thesis was that both are important and needed, just in different times in one's life. If I would have written this video a year ago, that's what it would have been about. But I didn't write this video a year ago. I'm writing it today. And today, I know this idea, this frame of exploration, is rotten to its core. Media always changes the people who consume it, and by extension, the world, small as that change might be. An attempt to simply reflect it is futile and irresponsible. So instead of trying to answer this nonsensical question of which approach is better, I'm going to be answering a better one. How are Shira and Bojack attempting to change the world and the people who watch them? Because they both changed me, intentionally or not. Children don't have a monopoly on being shaped by their experiences, and kids' media doesn't have a monopoly on having morals. And if you think your story doesn't, you're fooling yourself. Maybe that's why it seems kids' TV is so much better these days than adult oriented TV. The writers have the dignity and responsibility to recognize their works matter. I think you have to believe it matters to make anything worthwhile. The friend I argued with is a writer. I hope she believes in the power of her stories now. And if you, old friend, or you, a person watching this video, don't, I hope this video can convince you to care. Part 1. The Horse. Here's a extremely depressing sentence. The show BoJack Horseman used to be a huge part of my life and personality for a very long time. I had so many discussions about it, episode rankings. Hell, it's arguable the reason me and one of my ex-best friends even got close is through both loving the show. Naturally, when I went through deeply traumatic times, I turned to BoJack. I had just lost contact with my closest friend, and I thought rewatching BoJack with my friends, seeing some of my struggles reflected in the show, would help me heal. Most importantly, I was looking forward to the ending, what I saw at the time as a bittersweet ending of a chapter in one's life, leaving behind people who helped shape you and being ultimately okay with that. It didn't work. In fact, I think it made me much worse. The finale of the second last season was particularly hard to watch. I almost skipped out on it. Seeing Bojack this happy and healthy, and to have it be taken away from him, by him, was such a deeply depressing experience, and not the one a person dealing with self hatred and depression needed. I thought by seeing my struggles reflected, I would be healed. But reflection is not resolution. Reflection is not hope. Reflection, in some situations, can be torture. For me, Bojack ended up being mental self harm. I thought I was like him in some way, and the show deeply believes he is doomed. If that's true, I must be doomed too. You can't heal if you don't believe you can. And Bojack, seemingly, agrees with that. The show shows us how Bojack is the source of his problems, pain, and most importantly, pain inflicted on others. It tells us textually that Bojack must change to get better. That's what it tells us. But what does it show us? It shows us that he doesn't. It tells us it's possible to change, but it shows us it's not. I don't think that's intentional. I don't think that's what the writers think they think. But by choosing to center the show on Bojack, by escalating his failures, they shove themselves into a corner. You see, Bojack attempts to be an anti sitcom, one in which conflicts don't resolve after one episode, relationships change, and small details from earlier seasons can come back to be main plot points in the next ones. In that sense, it's a masterclass in world building. But it's a lie, and the worst kind of lie, one told to oneself. So much around Bojack changes, but Bojack doesn't. He is not allowed to, because that's simply the way the show and its message has been constructed. The creators hate Bojack, and more importantly, they hate the section of the audience that likes him. And in no point is this more clear than in Head in the Clouds.
No. And then, when she was sober, you took her on a month-long bender, and then she died. And she is dead now. And you're still alive, with a girlfriend who is also alive, and a TV show. And that's been really hard for you, the main character in this story.
The writers use Diane as a mouthpiece to tell the audience their interpretation is wrong. And can you blame them for this urge? Media with a toxic male lead has a history of being misunderstood and that lead being seen as the hero. Take Breaking Bad, American Psycho, Death Note, Fight Club. These works are meant as a critique, but because of the way stories are traditionally constructed, they are idolized by a major part of the audience. I don't think it's an issue of empathy or even humanization. These people don't like Light or Walter because they are human, but because they are cool. This goes back to the inevitability of messages in stories. As much as you try to tell the audience a main character is bad, the fact you follow their story by itself shows the audience it's worth telling. And that's always going to make some amount of people see them positively, aspirationally. And because you want your main character to be cool or interesting or unique, that only amplifies the problem. So here lies the corner the writers of Bojack wrote themselves into. They have a main character who they hate, and they feel their audience misconstrued him as a good guy. So, what are their choices for the end of his arc, and by virtue of him leading the story, the show as a whole? They have two broad choices on which this ending may be constructed: Bojack's development and the world's reaction to said development. Out of these choices, there are four main options for an ending. Option 1. Bojack turns good and gets a good ending. As we've discussed already, this option can't happen, since it will seemingly validate the wrong interpretation of the text, and we know the writers hate this interpretation. Option 2. Bojack turns good but still gets a bad ending. This option validates the problematic interpretation slightly less on first blush, but is also inherently frustrating to the average viewer. If our main character ultimately had no free will in the latter half of the show, that section can be seen as unnecessary story wise. Through that lens, this ending may also vindicate the interpretation even more. If Bojack becomes healthy and yet still doesn't get happiness, it validates his and this section of the audience's idea that him attempting to change is futile, and also that he is meaningfully wronged by his environment, and that wronging makes his abuse of others more justified. So yeah, this one can't happen either. Option 3. Bojack stays bad, but gets a good ending. This one doesn't need much explanation. Not only does it justify the wrong interpretation, it also philosophically is opposed to the show, again removing free will from our lead and making his struggles up to this point practically meaningless. Option 4. Bojack stays bad and gets a bad ending. This one is the closest to maybe working with the show so far, but again, is simply frustrating. Every other season of the show ends on a bad note. A finale can't return to the past, can retread the steps of the show while still feeling like an end conclusion. Furthermore, it breaks the anti sitcom theme. You should not be able to continue the show after the finale. It must be a conclusive end. So, how do we make a good ending without falling into any of these traps? The answer is in the body of the question here. We don't do any of those, but it's sort of non ending. Bojack meets Diane, the character who started the show, for what is implied to be the last time. They are different than they were in the beginning, more tired. Diane is happy now. She's on antidepressants. Bojack has grey hair. They talk, get a small bit of closure, but this ending lacks any sort of value judgment for Bojack. Diane doesn't hate him, doesn't like him. He's not happy, but not depressed and self hating. They are not friends anymore, but they've changed. It's beautiful in its realism. It's a perfect ending, the only good ending possible for the show we've watched up to this point. But the problem is not in this ending, it's in the show that led up to it. The flaws only turn obvious because of the ending. I think it's a flaw with the medium of TV. It's more than reasonable for the main characters of Bojack to not want to have Bojack in their lives at this point. It's more than justified. But because it's the finale, the show can't introduce new characters to be there for him, so the ending rings hollow to me because it's so difficult to love without feeling loved. And Bojack isn't. So are we meant to assume this horrible guy somehow accomplished one of the most incredible feats a human can accomplish without any support? I don't buy it. I just don't. So in the end, this ending is not really the best of both worlds, it's the worst of both worlds. And I felt that when I rewatched it then, it wasn't the right place to look for feeling better. But I did end up finding the right place in part 2, The Cat. The trajectory of my enjoyment of Shira could literally not be more reversed than the one of Bojack. I thought Shira was merely okay when I watched it for the first time, while Bojack instantly became my favorite show on a first watch. And I absolutely hated the ending of Shira. I thought it was cowardly and Deus Ex Machina-esque. What I saw as an epic, lore-based fantasy conflict was resolved quite literally with the power of love, a kiss between the hero and the person who until not too long ago was the main antagonist of the show, Catra.
I love you too.
The mark of a good piece of media, in my opinion, is enjoying it more the second time. The mark of a great one, though, is enjoying it more with time without having to consume it again. So after Bojack's failure, I thought of the ending to Shira. I hated so much, and I suspected more and more with time that if I watch it again, it'll become my favorite show. I was right. Expectations are the biggest enemy of being transformed by art, because to have a truly meaningful experience, you need to meet art on its own terms. In my first watch, I thought Shira was a high fantasy war story, with a complex magic system and the stakes raised every season. Through that lens, a kiss, as gay as it might be, saving the day is nonsensical. So nonsensical that when I finished the second last season, my best friend suggested I don't keep watching and instead have someone tell me what happens so I don't get as frustrated as he was. That's not what Shira is about though, and I didn't understand it at the time, perhaps because I didn't need to understand it at the time. The fantasy and white conflict are backdrops, excuses to tell a story Nate Stevenson wanted to tell, one about abuse, trauma, forgiveness, and love, one about Catra. Catra's character arc is a weird one, because it's extremely non-linear. She starts off on the same side as our protagonist, Adora. They are best friends who grew up together and have a lot, and I mean a lot, of lesbian tension. But Adora leaves the army they grew up to be soldiers for. She sees the atrocities they are committing, and she wants out. This is already a unique start for a story, but what follows next is even weirder. Catra does not follow Adora, but she doesn't do it because she doesn't believe her or disagrees with her. Catra knows the Horde is bad. She just doesn't care.
Been lying to us, manipulating us, Hordak, Shadow Weaver, all of them. Duh! Did you just figure that out?
She has no hope of breaking the system, only assimilating into it, rising through the ranks, and being at the top, with Adora at her side. Adora refuses, because of the more positive, but still extremely abusive, treatment she got from their shared mother figure, Shadow Weaver. Adora is relatively sheltered. She hasn't been broken down yet. She can still believe in abolition, in meaningful change. This is the villain origin story of sort for Catra, and on first blush, her redemption seems like a given. We have been conditioned at this point by animated media to assume villains that get a lot of screen time and are the same age as the protagonist are likely to be redeemed. But Catra is kind of a subversion of this. She doesn't get better with time. She gets much, and I mean much worse. She even has a moment I find reminiscent of the episode I had such a hard time watching in Bojack. In the end of Once Upon a Time in the Waste, Catra is finally happy, to a small degree at least. After being disowned by Hordak, she is sent on a suicide mission to what is thought to be a lifeless wasteland, the Crimson Waste. But once there, she finds it's anything but lifeless, being occupied by various outlaws and criminals. In a matter of hours, Catra takes over the waste and becomes the leader of the controlling gang. She finally lives for herself and not for the Horde. And maybe more importantly, she gets to be away from the constant reminders of her trauma, both as a child from the abuse of the Horde and later from the loss of Adora. That all culminates in Catra's first party. They don't have those in the Horde, in which she shows a sadly rare up to this point act of kindness to the girl so deeply in love with her, Scorpia.
Scorpia! A toast to Scorpia!
What? I can't. You guys, I thank you. Yes. Gosh.
Even after a short amount of time, we see the effects happiness has on the way she treats others. It paints her mistreatment toward her friends in the past in a way more tragic light. And Scorpia, being a kind and attentive friend, notices that and asks Catra to do what we've all been wanting her to do. And what is so foreign to Catra, it immediately silences her. Stay. Allow yourself to be happy. Move on.
So why would we go back? Let's stay here. Forget Hordak, forget Adora, forget all of them. We could rule the Crimson Waste together. Just the two of us. We could, you know, be happy.
If it could only have been this simple. Earlier in the day, Catra has captured Adora. And now that she is scared by Scorpia's radical suggestion, she uses that as an escape.
I don't. I have to go check on the prisoner.
When she's with Adora, her poise changes, and this time, we understand her attitude as the fearful self-lie it is. We see how tragic her nonchalantness is. The conversation starts off as normal as childhood friends who are leading opposing sides of a war can be. But then Adora drops an unintentional bombshell.
How? Catra? Shadow Weaver is in Bright Moon. Shadow Weaver left me. For you.
This shatters Catra. Her abusive mother figure that never saw her as enough, that manipulated her to escape, has chosen Adora. Adora has already taken the person she cares most about from her, which is Adora, and now the only other person she feels strongly about has betrayed her for Adora. She made her this way, and she gets to be the good guy. From here, Catra spirals, forgets the joy of the waste, and gets ready to commit the biggest atrocity she does in the show, almost killing the entire fucking world, which is the moment most audiences decide Catra's redemption chances are gone. This is awfully similar to what happens to Bojack near the end of season 5, which you might remember was so hard to watch for me. So why do I love this episode so much? I think it comes down to one qualitative difference in purpose. Bojack's descent is cruelty from the writers. Catra's descent is a kindness. Imagine the conversation with Adora didn't happen. Catra would stay, create a life with Scorpia, stay away from a majority of triggers and reminders. Slowly, she might become kinder and happier. In real life, this would be a good ending. Catra got out of there, not exactly breaking the cycle, but not exactly perpetuating it either. It's more than a lot of people get. The writers of Bojack take this ending away from him because they hate him. They don't think he deserves it. But the writers of Shira take that ending away from Catra because they love her and think she deserves better. Because this is not real life. It's a story. And unlike real life, the writers have full control. They can give Catra a truly happy ending with no ifs, ands, and buts. This is not it, but it's a necessary step to get her there. Get her to not an escape, but a resolution. In the end of the next season, Catra is in her lowest point. Scorpia left her for the princesses, like everyone else she ever cared about. She even broke her relationship with Hordak and Double Trouble. She is the most powerful she's ever been, but also the weakest. She truly has no one. In that moment, it seems there's no hope for her. How could she ever get the opportunity to get better? She's broken and suicidal, outwardly accepting death when the rebellion finds her.
You've lost. What are you waiting for? Do it.
But then, the big bad that was teased for the last 2 seasons shows up and yanks her away into his spaceship. Her and the rebellion leader, Glimmer. Glimmer. We will come back to Catra's arc and how it resolves, but I think to truly get how it works, we first need to get into Part 3, Their Pink Princesses. To be frank, the reason I originally decided to have the Their Pink Princesses part in the name of this video was because I thought it was absolutely hilarious that both Bojack and Catra have foils that are pink princesses. Like, I've not watched any other show that has a pink princess since I was maybe 6, and Bojack is such a serious show that's so anti being kid friendly that it's just really funny to me. After thinking though, I realized there is more to this seemingly purely aesthetical connection, one that goes deep into the arcs, or lack thereof, of the main characters of both shows. Both Glimmer and Princess Caroline, well, they kinda suck. The difference between them is that in Shira, the suckiness is used cleverly to strengthen Catra's arc and the themes at large, and with Caroline, it stands only to impede on Bojack's arc and the themes of the show. Let's start with Princess Caroline. At the start of the show, she seems like somewhat of a straight man, a rock of relative untoxicity and unshenaniganness Bojack can cling to. But as we learn as the show progresses, Princess C is kind of horrible. Her job puts her in situations where she can hurt people for personal gain, and she almost without fail does, and with little to no remorse. It's just showbiz to her, and she supports and helps perpetuate a lot of truly horrid stuff. Now, this is, by itself, not a problem. People are allowed to be flawed, and characters also are, of course. I think the problem here comes from a seeming ignoring of these flaws in her. The show is so obsessed with Bojack flaws that the writers seem to pay no mind to PCs. Now, of course, Bojack is worse, much worse. But excusing people's behaviors because other people are worse is not a healthy way to look at people, and it's not a good way to write a story about people's lives being ultimately in their own hands. It's normal to feel empathetic towards Princess despite of her flaws. But in the show absolutely averse to showing empathy to its protagonist, our empathy towards her pulls at the thematic and philosophical thread. Why does Bojack not deserve this empathy too? Is it because he doesn't try enough? Because he hurt more people? Because he's been doing it for longer? All of these questions just raise one inevitable question. Would the show want us to feel differently about Caroline if she moved more along any of these scales? Should we feel different about her? Well, this pink princess similarities to our main bad guy work to show the contradiction of the philosophy of the show. The other pink princesses does the exact opposite. It solidifies it in an emotionally resonant way. The season prior to the abduction of Catra and Glimmer is, in a thematic sense, an exploration of both of them as foils to one another. Adora and the rest taking a small step back from the foreground. In the end of the season prior, Glimmer's mom, Queen Angela, sacrifices her life to save everyone.
And now I choose to be brave.
No! Your Majesty! Angela!
This pushes Glimmer's arc to hyper mode. At the start, she's handling grief better than Catra, but as time goes on, the distinction erodes away. She starts pushing her friends away, lying to them, manipulating them, and maybe most damningly, she seeks mentorship from Shadow Weaver, and does not even consider how that is extremely triggering and worrying to Adora. Her power grows, but her support wanes, just like Catra. She almost kills everyone on the planet, just like Catra. The difference is, we know Glimmer better. We've seen her healthy for longer, and she is on the good side. So it's much easier to feel bad for her, to accept her redemption, to forgive her. And in the first half of season 5, when Catra and Glimmer are both imprisoned by Horde Prime, and slowly start warming up to one another due to being in the same position, the show confronts us with the same question Bojack did, except this time, it's on purpose. If we love Glimmer, think she deserves to be happy, to return to her good place, why not Catra? After all, they are now in the exact same position. And the answer is, well, we should feel the same for Catra. And so we do, even though it's harder. When Catra sacrifices herself to get Glimmer off the ship, we understand why Adora wants to go back for her, even though only half a season ago we would have seen it to be an extremely foolish mistake. When Catra is gradually forgiven by the people she once fought, our first instinct would be to feel like it's rushed, unrealistic. But because it's coupled with them forgiving Glimmer, and we are naturally inclined to want that to happen, it just feels right. The show uses our natural empathy to create empathy in a less natural place. But why does it want us to have empathy for Catra in the first place? Well, the answer is kind of complicated, I think. And to go into it, I need to talk about part 4 and final, how Bojack failed me and Shira saved my life. Here's a probably controversial sentence. Catra is, by any somewhat objective measure, a worse person than Bojack. She hurts more people, more deeply, and shows objectively less remorse until her redemption, and arguably less even after. So why does that feel so wrong to say? When I watched Shiro with my mom, she fucking despised Catra up to her redemption. But I never did. Nobody else I've ever watched the show with ever did. That's kind of weird, right? Like if she was a real person, we definitely would. But the show makes it hard to hate her, while Bojack makes it oh so easy to hate Bojack. To get to why, I think we need to start with how. The first answer to that comes to mind is tone. But that doesn't stand too much scrutiny. Bojack is much more of a comedy than Shira, and not even always a dark comedy. An easy retort to that is that Bojack's most devastating moments are played without any hint of comedy, but that's true for Shira as well. So it can't be that. It's not intent, since Catra does mean to hurt the people she did. It's not how personal the acts are, since Catra abuses exclusively people she has an emotional connection with. So then, what is it? The answer is stupidly simple, but also kind of terrifying. There is no reason. The double standard we hold makes absolutely no sense. I guess it's up to you to decide whether that's scary because Shira manipulates us into feeling empathy towards someone undeserving of it, or because Bojack manipulates us into not feeling empathy for someone deserving of it. I personally think the second one is way scarier and also way more true. Because the ways Shira makes us love Catra are extremely applicable to real life. It doesn't undercut the harm she does or justify it, it just shows us Catra is a real, complex human being. And guess what? Every person to ever inflict harm on someone else also is. It's not hard to see this philosophy taken too far and into an irresponsible place. If Shira gave this treatment to every one of its villains, I would think it would. But it doesn't do that. I've heard a lot of criticism about the way the finale handles Shadow Weaver back in the day, as a lot of people saw her death, sacrificing herself to save Catra and Adora, as an unearned redemption. You're welcome. But I think this is a pretty deep misunderstanding of the text. I see it as the exact opposite. Shadow Weaver does two things by sacrificing herself in such a way. First, she manipulates Adora and Catra one last time, forcing them to have even more complicated feelings about her. Second, and maybe more importantly, she opts out of the opportunity to challenge herself, to change, and to give her abused daughters closure. It's an act of cowardice on a personal level. She's too scared to confront them about her abuse, to confront herself. It's literally an anti redemption. Another criticism I saw is with the apparent redemption of Hodak, the Hold's leader up to season 5.
I remember you.
I'm so glad you're back. Oh, we have so much to talk about. I'm so glad you're here.
So are we all just like okay with this?
Again, I think seeing his ending as a redemption is simply wrong, and kind of acts on bad faith. Yes, Hordak is not killed like Horde Prime, and is shown to be friends with Entrapta, but we have no reason to believe anyone else will treat him with any kind of warmth. I see this treatment of him not as a redemption, but as a reflection of the show's deeply radical philosophy, that of harm reduction and not punishment. Why have the good guys been fighting Hordak up to this point? Because they hate him and want to inflict pain on him? No, obviously not. It's because he is in a position to cause immense harm, and he's using that position to accomplish that. If now he has been removed from this position, what reason is there to not let him live his life other than retributive justice? The same was true when Shadow Weaver was working with the rebellion. They didn't allow her to be a part of the war effort because she's a good person, whatever that even means, but because she's not doing harm. So then what reason is there to fight her except for pointless retribution? So yeah, Hordak has a friend now. So what? Is he not allowed to because he's past? What a mean and depressing way to look at people. The reason Horde Prime isn't given a similar fate is that he is not willing to stop the harm he is doing, and will continue to enact it as long as he is allowed to exist. It's a purely utilitarian act, and also because thematically, he literally cannot be allowed to keep existing for the show to make sense. I'm gonna talk a bit about Horde Prime now, because I think he's a bizarrely underrated villain. People see him as this dime a dozen big bad, but philosophically, I think he's the perfect final antagonist for the show, which also leads to why he has to be fully neutralized in the end. Horde Prime's entire thing is being anti redemption. Consider his motivation: create peace in the universe by literally killing everyone. He sees the world as irredeemable, sees death as the only way to atone for its sins. Also consider his entire purification ritual.
I am sorry that you must suffer.
People who he sees as wrong can be taught, can change organically. They must try again from scratch, have all their memories wiped. Again, death is seen as the only answer to imperfection. And that reminds me of Bojack, because say what you will about Bojack's choices, his relapses, the harm he enacts, he is a fictional character. The writers decided everything about him. And if you think he doesn't deserve a happy ending, you gotta ask yourself, why did the writers make him this way? What are they telling us about life through that choice? Good media is powerful because it gives us all the information we need to feel about it the way it wants us to feel. If we didn't follow Zuko through his struggles with doing the right thing and only saw him from the perspective of Katara, for example, we would reject his attempt to join the gang just as much as she did.
You might have everyone else here buying your transformation, but you and I both know you've struggled with doing the right thing in the past. So let me tell you something right now. You make one step backward, one slip up, give me one reason to think you might hurt Aang, and you won't have to worry about your destiny anymore. Because I'll make sure your destiny ends right then and there, permanently.
But we don't see his story from one perspective. And that, paradoxically, gives us more true to life perspective. Everyone in real life has a backstory, every action has a reason, but we don't see it. Media reminds us of that fact, because it has the power and time to show us the full story. In the simplest terms, it gives us the tools to be kind. In the end, Bojack and Shira are two shows about the same two questions, with two diametrically opposed answers. The first one they ask us indirectly, through asking their characters, what do you do with missing information? Will you choose kindness and empathy or assume the worst? Do you need to know people's reasons to wish them happiness? And let me tell you, if you need to know a person's entire life story and trauma to be able to love them, you'll be waiting forever. The second is a question they ask us directly by centering Catra and Bojack's stories. Once you do know a person fully, how should you feel about them? Should you love them or hate them? Now, this might seem like a moot point, since I said earlier we can never know someone fully outside of media. But I was lying before. Everyone has one person they know everything about, all their reasons and fear and trauma and joy. Everyone has themselves. And you have to love yourself. You simply must. As long as Bojack was my favorite show, I couldn't. But Shira allowed me to open myself to the opportunity. It didn't do the work for me, but nonetheless, it was a start. And that's why stories matter. I hope this one did for you. Thank you for listening.